It's Friday, the 22nd of November, 2024.
The last word in podcasting news. This is the Pod News Weekly Review with James Cridland and Sam Sethi.
I'm James Cridland, the editor of Pod News.
And I'm Sam Sethi, the CEO of TrueFans.
In the chapters today, Amazon Music gets Audible. How bad is Podfade? Podcast lists of 2024 from Apple and others. And
Mody, CEO and co-founder of Headliner, and glad to be here. We'll be on later to talk about all our integrations that we released recently, Hubhopper, TikTok, and more.
I'm Alberto Betella, and I'm going to be on the show to talk about Ghost AI and RSS.com.
They will. This podcast is sponsored by Buzzsprout with the tools, support, and community to ensure you keep podcasting. Start podcasting, keep podcasting with Buzzsprout.com.
From your daily newsletter, the Pod News Weekly Review.
Someone's woken Amazon up. I thought sleepy Amazon was off on holiday for the rest of the century. Wow. I guess Spotify's announcement last week sort of rattled a few cages because it looks like Amazon's adding audiobooks to Amazon Music. Now, what are they doing, James? Tell me more.
So this is a big deal, I think, and very clever. Amazon has, of course, Audible, which is the biggest audiobook website and service and everything else. They are putting all of Audible into the Amazon Music app. And anyone who is a subscriber to Amazon Music, which is an extra set of money, but anyone who is a subscriber to Amazon Music in the US, UK, and Canada can now listen to one Audible title for free each month, which is so super simple, isn't it? One book for free each month, or that also goes for one audio production that Audible has on offer as well for free. Each month. And of course, that goes alongside Amazon's music and also Amazon, let's not forget, also offers ad-free podcasts. So they actually pay money to take some podcasts which are ad-free and make those available for unlimited subscribers as well in the Amazon Music app. I think it makes a ton of sense, to be honest.
It does, except no one uses it. I mean, I'm an Audible user, and that one credit, which is fundamentally $7.99, is what they're now giving to Amazon Music. So that's the value proposition that they're offering.
Yeah.
I've got Alexas. I don't set my Alexas to use Amazon Music. I don't use it in the car. I don't use it on my phone. I'm a Prime member. I'm an Audible member, and yet I can't be bothered to go to Amazon Music. And I don't know what's causing that, but I don't think I'm alone. No,
I'm sure you're not alone. And actually, Amazon Music, it's got a free tier for Amazon Prime subscribers already. Unlimited is an extra $10 a month. They've got 200 million Prime subscribers across the world, at least, because that was the last figure that they released, and that was in 2020. So you can imagine how many that they've got now. But Amazon Music, I would agree, it really isn't used very much. If you look at OP3, I did a snapshot of that in August, 1.5% of all podcast downloads, which is actually more than Buzzsprout. Buzzsprout only say 0.9% in October. So I wonder whether a free audiobook will actually get people using the Amazon Music app a little bit more for their podcasts, but also Amazon Music, of course, one thing that Amazon does have, again, that Spotify doesn't, is Spotify Hi-Fi. Amazon launched HD audio back in 2019. Spotify Hi-Fi was announced in February 2021, but it still hasn't launched. So Amazon is actually a much better experience in terms of the content that they have than anything else. So I do wonder why people don't actually use it.
I think Amazon have missed so many tricks. I don't know what it is. The Alexa hiatus was massive at one point. I had 6 Alexas around the house. I can now probably think 3 are active, 3 are collecting dust. The Amazon skills just were useless. They didn't really do what they were supposed to do. The promised open AI LLM type upgrade to Amazon Alexas, nowhere near. And I think they're now saying you have to buy new ones. they should have made Amazon Music a default. I think Audible should have been part of Amazon Music years ago. And I've said this before on this show, I don't get why they have a separate Audible podcast division. It really probably only reflects internal politics between two directors who won't merge their little fiefdoms. I'm sorry, I just don't think this is going to move the needle for Amazon at all.
I think you're right, sadly, which is weird because Amazon Music does pretty well if you look into India and in Japan, where they are the number 2 open RSS podcast app. But everywhere else, they're virtually nowhere. And, you know, it's a little bit weird. I suppose if you were to have a look elsewhere, obviously Apple offers audiobooks. In the Apple Books app. Google offers audiobooks as well in Google Play Books. But obviously there's no subscription offer on either of those, and both of those are so separate from podcasts, they're not cross-promoted at all. So you've got that sort of side as well. I have to say, if you're a fan of audiobooks and you really like audiobooks, then you should be using the Libby app, which is completely free. You plug in your library card in there and you can download as many audiobooks and indeed, you know, ebooks as you like. So, you know, perhaps going away and using that. But yeah, it's a really good move from Amazon Music. Is it going to be enough to move the needle? I don't think so. And I do wonder why that is. And I wonder whether it's just, you know, it's, you know, at the end of the day, people who are interested in that sort of thing have Spotify already, or people who are interested in that sort of thing find that the Amazon Music app, for whatever reason, isn't quite as good as the app that they're currently using. I don't know.
Could it be just as simple as it doesn't say podcast in the word Amazon Music and no one thinks there's podcasts there?
I mean, but there again, nor does Spotify. So
no, but it doesn't say Spotify Music. It doesn't. It's Spotify.
Well, yes, absolutely.
So,
and also, I do notice that in the UI for Amazon Music, it says Audible. It doesn't say audiobooks. You know, I can understand that because actually they're offering more than just audiobooks. They're offering all of Audible's, you know, audio fiction and, you know, all of the paid podcasts that they have there as well. But again, I don't know how obvious that is going to be to a typical user. If they know Audible for audiobooks, are they going to know Audible for all of the other stuff that Audible does? I don't know. So, you know, it's really interesting. I'm always fascinated at Amazon because they clearly have an awful lot of good people working there. But I am fascinated at seeing why that product just simply doesn't get there when actually on paper it's a much better experience, you know, in terms of content than anything else which is available.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird that also we've tried on numerous occasions, I know I have, I'm sure you have as well, James, to try and get Amazon spokespeople to come on this show to talk about their strategy, to tell about new product announcements. Nada, nothing. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if they're going to be too cool for school, like Apple. You know, we can't talk to anybody. We're Apple. And I don't know if Amazon's just trying to copy them. But it would be nice if an Amazon spokesperson from somewhere around the globe actually decided to talk to the press, and it would be helpful to tell us what they're doing because, again, they're out of sight and out of mind to me. That's fundamentally what I think the problem with Amazon is. And I don't think this is going to make any difference.
No, I mean, I would say, as we may get into at the end of this show, I would say that Amazon's PR people are lovely. And obviously I have not a beef with them at all. They are fantastic people and I wish them all very well. But what I would also say is that for many years, Amazon wasn't sending me any press releases at all about the Amazon Music app because I'm based in Australia, and so therefore it was the job of somebody in Australia to send me the information, even though all of the information was, of course, coming out of the US. So it ended up being a real sort of messy territorial thing of the people in the US said, well, he's in Australia, so the Australians should be dealing with that. And the people in Australia were going, well, you're coming up with all of the ideas and the stories. You should be helping him with that. So it was just, it was a bit of a mess. So, I mean, but as I say, Amazon's PR people are talking to me now and then, and lovely human beings.
I will praise that for you then, James. That was Sam Sethi who had a go at Amazon. James loves you. You're okay.
Yes.
Now, just one thing you mentioned, Spotify not releasing the hi-fi version of their audio tracks or music tracks. They're not stupid, so why do you think they're not doing it, James?
I wonder whether or not actually it's a bit of an issue with the record companies. The record companies playing hardball with Spotify and basically saying, no, you don't get access to our high quality master tracks until you do X, Y, or Z. And Spotify have said, well, we don't want to do X, Y, and Z, so we're just not going to bother. I wonder if it's just purely that it's a contractual, argument with the record companies. If they've got some leverage over Spotify, and you can see them wanting to have a little bit of leverage over that company, then this is a great place for them to do that, because they can just turn around and say, well, no, we're not going to give you our high quality masters. So I think it just could be, frankly, just as simple as that.
James, moving on then. Spotify was a big conversation piece for us last week, and Spotify, we talked about a few weeks ago, has rolled out an easier way to share podcasts to TikTok, both music and audiobooks, and we talked about their integration with Instagram. But we also touched on the fact that a company called Headliner has done a lot of work with Spotify, YouTube, TikTok, and it seemed that it would be a good time to talk to somebody at Headliner. They've done deals with Hubhopper and they've done deals with video creators as well. So Headliner, we use it, don't we, James?
Yeah, we use it for this very podcast. We use it to get this show onto YouTube for the 3 people who listen there every week. So that's a good thing. But Headliner has all kinds of very cool things, both video support for podcasters, Headliner's Eddie, which is a audio editor, and plenty of other things. You caught up with Neil Mody, who's a lovely man, and also the CEO and co-founder of Headliner. And you started off by asking, what is Headliner?
We try to build the easiest ways for people to grow their podcasts. So now it's become, I wouldn't say a platform, but getting there, basically a suite of tools that really help you try to grow your podcast. Everything from the smallest podcaster, the individual kind of hobbyist, all the way up to some of the biggest podcast operations and large organizations are using Headliner to really attract new audience, either through making short social videos to posting on YouTube, or through our new product Disco that helps them basically take readers of their website and convert them into podcast listeners. And so, yeah, we just keep on building to try to find new audience for podcasters, and the tools come from that mission.
You got one other product as well in that suite, which is called Eddie. What's Eddie?
Basically, what we found is for the social video tool that we're kind of known for, or kind of our main product since 2018, people started increasingly wanting to use the transcript as a clipping mechanism, right? So when you want to find a clip, there's a bunch of ways to do it. There's a kind of legacy ways, which is using a waveform, which audio creators are very familiar with. But for a new podcaster or a new creator, the waveform's kind of something new that they're not familiar with. And a transcript becomes a much easier way to figure out what clips you want to maybe share to social. So Eddie was basically an add-on product for our individual creators all the way up to kind of big media companies who are trying to figure out which clips they want to send to social. And interestingly enough, it gave us our opportunity to build out the promo pack with all the kind of AI-powered LLM-generated social kind of descriptions, keywords, all sorts of meta information that helps podcasters kind of streamline their workflow as well. So it's kind of grown into this tool that's now used by thousands of podcasters a week. Actually, it just keeps growing. And so we're kind of lucky to have it at this point.
We started using Headliner just for audio clipping with nice graphics and throwing that out as social media. And then you did the YouTube integration. And it was like, oh, okay, well, James and I don't do video, but hey, we can put a still graphic, but we can still post automatically. That's the key to YouTube as well. Yeah. And that was great. I then used it for my own radio station, River Radio, which was really useful. You've also got an analytics engine built into Headliner. So this is really good first-party data on who listened to my clip, which platform listens to my clip, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really cool. Is there an open API around that as well that I can use that with my other analytics anywhere?
It's a good question. We don't do it because we're actually pulling it from the APIs from the platforms. But in terms of the data from our consumption platform, we can and should build that. I would say we haven't had the users who are trying to pull that in yet. We're just pulling data from what's out there and already available. But on our platform side, it's actually a very good question and something we can and should do to the extent that people want to pull in that information. We've gotten to some serious scale now with Disco. And so the question is, for some of these publishers using us, we're bigger than Apple and Spotify in terms of audience. And so I know that's crazy to think about in podcasting, but again, their websites do so much traffic. And so our data is actually more interesting and we're more transparent about it. So getting that out in API form is probably useful. But right now we've been doing the tooling to make it more interesting than what the hosts provide and the platforms provide. And that's kind of what we've been focused on. That's a whole nother topic, but yeah.
So talk to me about your integration with Hubhopper. Two parts of the question. One is, talk to me about the Hubhopper integration and what that is. And then secondly, are you going to be partnering with any other hosts as well?
So the Hubhopper integration is actually integrating Eddy, which is that transcript-based, tool to generate transcripts, all the AI show notes and keywords and social post copy, et cetera, all the kind of meta packaging information, as I like to say, content, and really enable kind of fast clipping all the way over to Make by Headliner for the social posts, et cetera. So we integrated, I think, because generally, Gautam kind of saw that you could, and he's a CEO of Hubhopper, I think you could see that we were committed to building a tool that would easily integrate white label, no less, which you don't see from a lot of people in the industry, but allow their users a quick way to do this instead of building it all from scratch for themselves, which, by the way, I would say most hosts have done for Make with the social posting tool that we have. Again, building all this stuff and supporting all the different social networks, it's an ongoing lift, right? And so focus on what you do best for the customer. And I think he saw that as a hosting provider, and I think other hosting providers have looked at other companies for this. We just tend to generally be the most white label and best mix of cheapest, best, and most accommodating. And that's what's led us to dozens of integrations, and Hubhopper's one of the newest ones. And I would say more integrations. I mean, we've got a few more coming, and you guys will be the first to know. But definitely some more hosts are looking at these tools because, first of all, the transcript and getting it is a cost for the host. And we, given our scale, get it much cheaper than anybody else. And we pass that back to our hosts. And then staying up on all the LLMs and all the things that they can do is its own engineering effort. So we've taken that away, and the host can focus on building the best hosting platform, connecting with all the actual consumption platforms. We'll take care of this for them.
Neil, I had one question I really wanted to ask you, and I think you'd be perfect for answering the question. The big debate right now is Spotify video and YouTube video versus audio. And what constitutes a podcast. Spotify talking about shows, changing it from Spotify for podcasts to creators. Given that you are one of the biggest now at producing clippings and videos and everything else, where is your head around the market around Spotify, YouTube, and podcasting?
It's an excellent question. I would say I would like to see the creators and the consumers decide. And I think they've largely decided that for some genre of podcasts, namely interview podcasts, you can attract an audience better on video than you can on audio. Attract, again, bring them in the door. And then the hope is over time you can retain them better, I believe, on audio rather than video. It's early there, but that's the data I'm seeing. And so for a company like YouTube and Spotify, that's what they need to do. Well, YouTube was already there. Spotify needed to grow into that. Again, this is kind of remnants of what happened with the Joe Rogan deal and his numbers. Again, I like to point out Joe Rogan, even when he was exclusive on Spotify, had more subscribers, they still call it subscribers on YouTube, than followers on Spotify. Okay. So you have an exclusive show on Spotify that actually has more subscribers, followers, whatever you want to call them, on a different platform that doesn't even have the show anymore. And at some point, you have to ask yourself, what is the strategy? And they figured out we're not going to keep these shows closed. And now the question is, if video is where people want to consume this stuff, we have to support it. So the question is, what happens to narrative fiction podcasts, comedy podcasts, etc.? I think interview podcasts, generally speaking, again, to attract audience, you almost need to do video. And that class has moved there to attract audience. Again, to keep them, different story. But I think we're all in the business of trying to find more audience as creators, and video is kind of piece of that for sure at this point.
And of all your endpoints that you spread clips to, which is the most active coming back?
I'd have to check the data. I actually think it's YouTube. We have the most data from YouTube. We publish to YouTube more than any other platform, I believe. Social's an awareness play more than a click-through kind of to final consumption. When you get someone listening on YouTube, they generally want to dig deeper, and making that available is useful. And I think 3-4 years ago, probably you and I had a conversation. Most of the podcast industry was anti-YouTube. Maybe a little more than 3-4 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, 5-6 years ago. They were anti-YouTube. And to your point earlier, you got to go where audience is if you want to grow audience. I'm sure you're tired of hearing me say this, and maybe some of the audiences. Podcasting is still really small. There's 5 billion people online. There's only 500 million listening to podcasts. That's 1/10. 500 million to 5 billion. That's 1/10. So 9 out of 10 people online haven't listened to a podcast. So between Meta and YouTube, if you're not posting to those two platforms, that's half the internet you're not getting to, right? Like easily. Now, are you going to get discovered there? I think those debates are valid. Like, hey, how big can this get for me and all that stuff? But to not be there at all, I think, again, that's just a mistake from a customer acquisition. If it's a strategy decision, monetization decision, hey, that's all good. But to say you're not going to get audience on the biggest platforms, would you not want to be on Google search in any way, shape, or form? That's basically what you're kind of saying, right? And I think that has handicapped podcasting to some extent. And I think we're just growing out of that. And video, I think similarly for some class of shows, to the extent that people are comfortable with it. And yes, I know it sucks to get camera ready and all those kind of things, and you'll be judged in a different way. But hey, this is what the audience wants, as Spotify has done all the data and research on, and YouTube knows all too well. And this is where creators are going. And so you either embrace it or you buck the trend and keep the audience where you want. And that's totally fine too. There's always going to be a market for only audio consumption, but clearly to grow, video is a component of it. And we've been saying that for a long time. As you know, the internet is a visual medium first, and you need to hook people visually before you can hook them with your audio. And Headliner's kind of been at the forefront of that for 6-7 years now.
Remind everyone very quickly, if they want to go and find out more about Headliner, where do I go?
Headliner, the best place to find us is headliner.app. So on the web, headliner.app, headliner.app, and then all the socials. I think we've got some different handles, but you'll find us. And me directly, if you want. Best place to reach me is actually email. I'm kind of old school. Neil, Neil, at headliner.app.
Neil, thanks so much, mate.
Thank you, Sam.
Neil Mody, the CEO of Headliner. There is, of course, a full version, plenty more to listen to in the Pod News Extra feed, including Neil talking about interview-only shows and video, and also talking about the fact that podcasting is still relatively small as well. You'll find the Pod News Extra podcast wherever you found this one.
Now, Another company that we have a fondness for is RSS.com, friends of the show, Alberto and Ben, and they announced a few weeks ago that they had successfully got a patent for AI-driven scalable ads. It's the idea to allow you to replicate hosts' authentic voices and then customize those with contextual data. So hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, rather than re-recording that. I caught up with Alberto Betella to ask him about the patent, but I also, in this interview, learnt a few things, James. Prosodic features, monodirectional and parasocial relationships, James. Hey, and something he called empathetic AI. He's a super smart man, Alberto. I don't know if you remember, but he's got a PhD in this stuff. Yeah, he's got a PhD. I've got a little MBA, nothing useful there. But he's got a big old PhD. But I started off by chatting with Alberto and I said, you've got a patent, Alberto. What's in the patent?
It's a patent on voice cloning or voice mimicking to produce programmatic ads for audio, podcasts, and broadcasts in general. So it's very nice. We filed it in November 2021. So it literally took 3 years for it to be approved. It was a lot of to and from with the reviewer, but we are very happy to have this as a patent. So very excited.
Why did you start to put this patent together? What was the thinking about it?
Well, the original thinking was an idea that came from Ben, who is my co-founder. He went to a conference, got the idea, and we noticed there was no prior art specifically patenting this idea. So we thought it would be nice to pursue it. And really, the main goal initially was for Ben and I to have a badge to be inventors. We never filed nor got a patent before. So we thought back in 2021 or even before, we thought we should do that. And so that was the first driver. The second one was that we feel we are a tech company, but most of the time we are labeled as a podcast hosting company, where hosting per se is not a cutting-edge solution. People use third-party services like AWS CloudFront. So really, it was a statement for us to be there and say, we are also building technology and we have a patent on the market. So really, the first drive was, let's get a badge. You get a college degree, you get a degree, and a patent is one of the things we didn't have. And so we are very happy on a personal level. But then we saw there was a need for something like this in the industry.
So now you've got the patent. Where do you see it being used? I mean, are RSS going to do this? Is it a third party thing? How do you think you're going to enable people to use the patent that you've got, or how are you going to use the patent that you've got?
So the patent itself is going to be commercialized with the business name Ghost.ai, G-O-S-T.ai, which is actually also the website you can look at. And the idea is either building it ourselves sooner than later, or license it if we find a great partner. Actually, this interview today, perhaps it's going to be very useful to throw a stone out there and see if someone picks it up and comes back. So the idea is building, but partnering would be also a great option just for the sake of speed. But really what we've seen in many occasions, the use of text-to-speech to generate ads, contextual ads, so that you can use placeholders, like you said, good morning, good afternoon, good morning, New York, good morning, Chicago, good evening, LA. So I think this is just a natural evolution where instead of using a generic text-to-speech voice, you can create a model of the host. This would be done with the full approval of the host, so following all the ethical guidelines, the FTC guidelines. So really, this is not about cloning a voice without consent and using it to, let's say, fool the listeners. On the contrary, it's a technology that is going to streamline the workflows for podcasters. They want something close to host-read ads, but they don't want to invest the time that often is required for host-read ads, especially when they need variants, many variants. So really, I clone my voice, and then using scripts of advertisement, they can be generated programmatically in the thousands or hundreds of thousands with no effort except cloning my voice for a few minutes initially.
It also works very well, I guess, when you want to do internationalization. So if you wanted to do a script and then put that into a foreign language, again, there's no limits or bounds there, I guess.
Absolutely. That's one of the best part of the patent and of the technology per se. So when you clone a voice, the underlying mechanisms are based on voice features. And these features are called prosodic features. For example, the accent, like my accent, the intonation, the pitch, the rhythm. These are prosodic features. And prosodic features are what make my voice or your voice, the personal voice, right? So it's not just the so-called utterance. The utterance is, the basic speech. But really these extra features are what makes a voice more personal. And that's exactly what we are going to be doing. We are going to be mimicking or even cloning 100% the voice so that the listeners can identify themselves more, they can be more engaged because they've been listening to a host, they trust them. And so if there is something which resembles their voice, unconsciously, it is more engaging. It doesn't mean you're fooling them again, but it's just, instead of skipping the ads, naturally, you are more prone to listening to it. And that's really where the technology taps into.
Recently, you presented something called empathetic applications. What are empathetic applications, Alberto?
Okay, so that's very interesting. This is something I've been working firsthand in a previous life. I was for almost 7 years in academia doing my PhD specifically on this topic. Actually, my specialization is affective computing. That is a discipline that was created in 1992 with a book from Rosalind Picard at MIT Media Lab. But later on, it has been called also emotion AI. Nowadays, everyone wants to use the AI, AI everywhere. So, but substantially, what this is, emotion AI, is machines that can interpret, read, convey, and even induce emotion to the listener, to the user. So the application of these are infinite, literally. And there can be good application and bad application. But among the good applications is interfaces that understand how the users feel and adapt to them so that it's a better user experience. And also mental health, digital mental health application, and you can go all the way to speaking with someone who's not here anymore. Some people already cloned Albert Einstein voice, and we can go there and go into philosophical conversations very soon. But really, emotion AI leverages emotions and therefore prosodic features in a voice to convey something and to make this message and narrative more engaging.
Are you introducing an element of emotion? And how? I mean, how will I feel more emotion to what is clearly an AI machine?
Okay, so this is deeply rooted in how our brain works. So what you're tapping there is really some circuit, for example, the limbic system in the brain. Let me step back is that there is a concept in psychology that we all know, maybe we don't know how it's called, but we know the concept, and it's called parasocial relationship. It was created in the mid-50s, especially with the media growing, TV, radio. And parasocial relationship means that a host of a TV show, of a radio show, of a podcast, or even a personality on social media has this unique relationship with their listener and followers, but is a monodirectional relationship, meaning the host doesn't know the followers at the personal level. But the followers, especially after a while following the host, feel the host is their friend. They know details and nuances of the host's life that the host maybe doesn't even remember he mentioned or they mentioned at all. So this is called parasocial relationship. And the parasocial relationship is, after all, an emotion. It's intimacy, it's feeling close to someone, and therefore you feel you can speak, you feel you can open to them. And that's why when you clone a voice or you mimic a voice, you could just have instead of cloning completely you, Sam, as a host, you may want to opt for a British accent, a certain male, certain age range. That's mimicking. But the closer the outcome, the voice, is to the original host, the higher this parasocial relationship taps into the listener. And therefore, the listener feels, that's the emotion part, they feel that the message they're receiving is close to them. Does it make sense?
It does, yeah. I've heard James do a version of Pod News Daily in Spanish, and I've heard him do it in Italian. And I can hear the intonation of James's voice, which gives me an element of, as you say, the parasocial is giving me a trust level. I know James, he knows what he's talking about when it comes to podcasting. I don't understand exactly what he's saying in Italian or French, but I do know that it is James. So there's a level of trust. And that's, I guess, what you're introducing with Ghost is the fact that it's not just a AI unknown voice, which I have no relationship to. You're introducing a host voice that I have a relationship to through this parasocial relationship.
This is precisely what we address with our patent and the technology. That's precisely that.
Alberto, thank you so much. If people want to find out about Ghost ads, where would they go? Let's start there.
They would go to ghost.ai, G-O-S-T.
And if they want to find out more about what RSS.com's doing with its podcasting 2.0 and the dynamic ad insertions, where would you go?
Well, you could go to rss.com, but also if you are curious about the day-to-day and what we create, you can go to changelog.rss.com. This is where you really see our daily operations and how our product evolves.
Amazing. Alberto, thank you so much, my friend. Speak to you soon.
Thank you. Speak to you soon. Thank you for inviting me.
Alberto Betella from RSS.com. I'm an advisor to the company, just to let you know. And there is a longer interview from that in the Pod News Extra feed in case you want to learn about monetization models in podcasting and value for value and what he thinks of Spotify's newly announced ad-free podcasting initiative as well. It's all in the Pod News Extra podcast, and you can find that wherever you get this one.
The Pod News Weekly Review with Buzzsprout. Podcast hosting made easy.
Moving on, James. There was a report in Pod News Daily about podfade. So it was how bad is podfade, the phenomenon where podcasters stop podcasting. So James, how bad is podfade?
So I looked at the podcast index data for January and February of this year because I thought, I wonder how many podcasts started in January? Turns out 25,000. And how many stopped posting new episodes by the end of February? And it turns out that of the 25,000 podcasts that started in January, 7,000, more than 7,000, haven't posted a new episode since the end of February. So 30% of people podfaded in less than 2 months. Which I found fascinating. And it's not who you think it is. I thought, it'll be Anchor, it'll be Spotify for creators, it'll be their fault. No, they're actually doing better than the average with 22.7%. So they're actually doing pretty well. OSHA, 20%, Megaphone, 18%. Libsyn 12%. So I thought, that's quite fascinating. So it turns out that it's the podcast hosting companies, the paid podcast hosting companies with the free trials that show the highest levels. So I imagine that that's people who have started podcasting, who have got into month number 2, they haven't got the numbers that they're expecting, and then all of a sudden they're being asked to pay. And I suspect it's those two things at the same time actually means that it ends up being pretty high. So RSS.com, 71% of their shows pod faded in that time. Spreaker, 40%. And so on and so forth. So, I just thought that was a pretty interesting data. And it occurs to me that what I could do is go back to that data and use that data as a new shows on these podcast platforms as a ranker for every single month. And that might be interesting to go and take a look at as well.
No, I think that would be fascinating because I was going to ask you what happened in February, March, April, May. You know, and is there a trend? I mean, again, not asking you to do too much more work, but is there a trend over years? Is this, you know, a normal, I'm bored at Christmas, let's get a new microphone for Christmas. Oh, let's start a podcast. And then, oh, that's hard work, I'm not going to bother doing that again.
Now, the only problem with this data is, of course, that some podcast hosting companies, and I believe Buzzsprout, our sponsor, does this, they delete free accounts when the free trial ends. So therefore, they won't appear on the data as I've downloaded it now. So perhaps what I should be doing is downloading the data on the first of the month and looking at the previous 2 months and actually seeing what happens there. That would require me to be organized. And so therefore, that's never going to happen. But, but I quite like that. So therefore, other podcast hosting companies may be a little bit higher in terms of that. But just so that you know, the top 5 companies with new shows in January: Spotify for Creators at number 1, RSS.com at number 2. So well done, RSS.com. Buzzsprout at number 3. Well done, our sponsor. Spreaker at number 4, and Acast at number 5, which was surprising. In between all of those 5, they attracted 60% of new shows in that month. So how consolidated is podcasting? Well, 60% is done by the top 5 podcast hosting companies. So that was quite a thing too.
That could be even skewed further, because how much is Spotify of that 60% taking? Well,
yes, indeed. How much of Spotify is that 60% taking? I mean, I could tell you that number if you wanted to know. But yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely something there in terms of that. Of the 25,000 shows that started in January, 7,000 started with Spotify, 2,500 with RSS.com, 2,400 with Buzzsprout.com. So you can very clearly see that Spotify is still doing incredibly well. But so really interesting numbers. I'd not considered using the podcast index data in that way, but that was something that I found quite interesting, I thought.
Is Podfade only because, they realised that just rocking up to a mic isn't just rocking up to a mic, but there's all the other stuff you have to do, which is, promotion and post-production editing and all the other bits? Or is it a case of, I'm not going to get Joe Rogan levels of audience and I'm not getting paid, so I can't be bothered? What do you think Podfade happens for?
I think there's a load of different reasons. I think firstly, it's people just not getting the numbers that they were expecting. I think it's another thing is it's an awful lot of work to put together a podcast, to find the right people to interview if you're doing an interview show, to do the research and blah, blah, blah. And so quite a lot of people don't get the workflow right. And one of the things that I've been doing a lot of podcasts on recently has been about workflow and making sure that you get that workflow right if you're working on a new project. And I don't think that quite a lot of podcasters do that. And then obviously now it's even worse because people are sitting there going, well, I've got to do video, haven't I, if I'm doing a podcast? And so then they're investing in cameras and lights and, and all of that. And so it gets even more complicated for them. I mean, I think you can have a look at the numbers very clearly. You see that a lot of podcasters actually give up after doing 1 or 2 episodes. I mean, it really is as simple as that. So it's a case of just making sure that you start and consistently go on with something that you can actually do on a consistent basis. And I'm sure that a lot of people suddenly realize that producing a podcast isn't quite as easy as just hitting record, talking nonsense for an hour and a half, and then hitting the publish button. I know that some people do that, but most of the time it's much more complicated.
Now, one of the other things that, of course, is coming out now, we are beginning to see 2 things. One is the prediction shows, and one is the podcast lists of the most popular podcasts of 2024. And now Apple, of course, have put their list out, and you did some extra work with that, though, James. So tell me more about the list from Apple first, and then what you've done.
Yes, so the only thing that Apple did is they released a press release which had the US top 10 shows on there and a few other charts that they put together, which is very Apple Podcasts. If you look at their Twitter account, for example, it's all US stuff. They seem to really only care about the US. So I thought, wouldn't it be more useful if, as I've done in previous years, to be fair, I went through and had a look at all of the other charts that were available. It's much, much easier now because Apple Podcasts has a web interface which you can have a look at this information in, as long as you defeat some of the clever stuff that Apple has done on there. So I had a list of the English-speaking countries and then a link to as many of the charts that I could actually find. I went through every single country in the world. I only found 33 charts available in the Apple Podcasts app. The Apple Podcasts PR said over 100 territories. It's not. It's only 33.
They never thought anyone would check.
I know. I have a feeling that is exactly the case. I did ask Apple whether or not I'd made a mistake or something, but of course heard nothing back, because why would Apple bother to reply to any of the emails that I sent them? But really interesting, actually, going into not just the list of the top shows, which is kind of one thing, and being able to go into, countries like India and Italy and Japan and all of those places and see what those charts are looking at and see how many American stuff is in those particular charts. But also really interesting, the countries that Apple have bothered to give a chart to and the countries that Apple have bothered not to. So you go into the Netherlands, for example, Norway, Sweden. No, they don't have any charts whatsoever. Mexico, yes. Poland, yes. Seemingly an awful lot from the Arab states as well. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, all of those places, Kuwait, all of those places have lots of charts. But then you have a look at, Thailand has one, but there's none from the Philippines, there's none from Indonesia, and so on and so forth. So I just found it really interesting. I'm not quite sure what it says, but I just found it really interesting, the editorial focus of the Apple Podcasts team, which countries that they had bothered to put charts together for, and which they just hadn't bothered at all. And of course, where Apple Podcasts isn't actually available, because surprise, surprise, actually Apple Podcasts isn't available in a bunch of places, which I was unaware of. So, so that was an interesting experience going through all 190 countries in the world and seeing where the charts actually were.
You'll be presenting at the UN next if you keep doing this. Now, no, I think we've talked on this show about how outside of the English-speaking countries, how Apple's penetration has been reducing, how Spotify's increased, and certainly in the countries where Android is the predominant phone of choice because of price, then Apple doesn't actually appear anywhere, really.
Yeah, no, indeed. And, and the Apple Podcasts on the web thing isn't a proper PWA, so still doesn't work properly on Android phones, still looks as if it's just a website. It's one line of code. And I have...
they only get the coder for one time a year. You know that.
Well, I did tell somebody at Apple Podcasts that in August, and I reminded them last week. And they said, oh, thanks for the reminder. So who knows? They might fix it at some point. But it would make for a useful thing. Yeah, I do look at Apple Podcasts and I think there are so many good things that Apple Podcasts does, but there are so many things that Apple, you kind of wish that they would move a little bit faster on. Video is another interesting thing where, obviously the Apple Podcasts app supports video, but they never promote it. And it might just be that they don't consider it to be a good enough user experience, and perhaps they're right. But I do find Apple Podcasts a little bit weird from that point of view.
I'm excited for the new feature we get next year, whatever it is, because we only get one. But I'm excited. I am excited. I don't know what they're going to give us, but I am excited. Now, yes. Other ones that are there on the lists, PodTrack have got their top podcast by country, James. That's just been recently updated for October. That was quite a good list, actually. I went through that looking at different countries. That was quite nice.
Yeah, they're not bad. They part of the data is estimated, and so, or in other words, made up. And so it's not necessarily perfect, but it's a useful, view into some of those countries. So it's worth a peek. Magellan AI also has released a ranker as well, but this time it's a ranker for top podcast advertisers. T-Mobile at number 3, BetterHelp at number 2, Amazon at number 1. The biggest movers this month, interestingly, Robinhood, who are an investment company, so you can buy stocks and shares with that, and AI company Anthropic. Are they the people that own OpenAI, or is that different?
No. Anthropic are basically Perplexity.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, they were the second biggest mover, i.e. they spent much more in October than they did in September, which I thought, that's just interesting. An AI company actually spending big bucks in terms of of podcast advertising. Magellan AI also has a webinar. Interestingly, Magellan AI also this week became the latest company to be compliant with IAB podcast measurement guidelines. They are version 2.2 compliant as of this week, which I think they're joining Podscribe, which is another, they do attribution, as does Podscribe, obviously. So I think that's interesting, seeing that they are jumping in. And as we mentioned yesterday, we learned that there are a few companies who will be removed from that IAB measurement guidelines list by the end of the year because they have chosen not to recertify. So the IAB won't tell us who they are, but we do know that some companies are going away from that list. So there's a thing.
Yeah, we've also got Time Magazine have produced a top 10. I like looking at these top 10s only because it's often different ones in the top 10 rather than the normal same old. So it gives you just different perspectives. Yeah. Going back to what you said about lots and lots of other people in the industry talking about Spotify, YouTube, video. Mark Asquith on his show with Danny Brown, In and Around Podcasting, had a really good discussion about it. Harry Duran has had a really interesting insight into what Ariel said, so he's responded. John McDermott from Calaroga Shark Media had a good post as well, if you want to go and read, with lots of interesting comments.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people out there, James Bishop being another one. So I think people are having conversations now around Spotify, what we were talking about last week, YouTube, and the direction of the industry. I suppose it's the end of the year, people thinking about what's happened and what's going forward for 25.
Yeah, I think, one of the things I do worry about is, James Bishop, for example, he posted this long screed about why I believe YouTube will dominate podcasting in 2025. And he's sitting there dribbling about how wonderful YouTube is and, and how many people use YouTube. And it's great for monetization and it's great for community building and all of that stuff. And get your bleeper on the ready, because I'm about to drop an F-bomb. But I replied to his breathless excitement about how YouTube is the future. And I said, if YouTube leads podcasting, then heaven help us, because you've boosted the entire industry. I replied to
I did notice that.
No programmatic ads dependent on Google's algorithm, run by people who don't care about podcasting, massively increasing podcasting's costs with video, editorial control with big tech in America, and plenty of other dumb, stupid ideas. If you want, I said, podcasting to retreat into 5% of all YouTube views and to lose the benefit of a multitasking medium like an audio podcast, then go ahead. But when podcasting dies and the entire industry falls over and closes, don't say you weren't warned. We should be fighting YouTube's apparent ascendancy, certainly not giving bad hot takes in a misguided chase for LinkedIn hits. Anyway, 42 likes.
I do love it when you sit on the fence. I so love it.
And a bunch of people, Irene Hume, a friend of the show from the Game Changers podcast, saying, well said. Andrew Menzel from Piccolo Podcasts, 100% agree. and so on. Shrikant Joshi saying, I understand your frustration, but I think YouTube's ascendancy is practically inevitable as things currently stand. I feel you are missing a key point. The dominant platform is not chosen by the creators, it's chosen by the audience. And I think I responded correct, but the creators do have a say as well. And we can sit on our hands and do nothing and let fools give away the entire industry to YouTube and Spotify. It's really up to us. But it just worries me that we are just lying back and going, okay, YouTube, and okay, Spotify to a degree, but okay, YouTube particularly. Yeah, you know, come and steal all of our stuff. Come and do whatever you like to our business. We'll all be out of business if 100%. Podcasting turns into YouTube.
Well, we've got a WhatsApp group that I'm on with quite a few hosts. And
it's a secret WhatsApp group. I don't get to go in. But
anyway, go on. You have been invited and never responded. May I add?
Have I? Okay.
Check your inbox, Mr. Cridland.
I bet I haven't. Anyway, go on.
Anyway, you will find one soon after then. What was interesting, Rob Greenlee was talking about the whole of the YouTube Spotify discussion, and he said, I do wonder if we've gone past the point of no return on adoption of these new RSS ideas, and the big platforms have won the market. So that was one view of it. He was talking about Apple being missing in action, which we know, and not putting video forward. And then Todd came in, and I got slightly annoyed because there's a new tag that's being put forward called content links. And I understand why certain people want that tag. It works well for their business. I get it. Not all tags are going to be something that, with my True Fatens hat on, that we are going to implement. And this is one we won't. Because what it is instead of using the alternative enclosure, Todd is saying, no, we'll put content links for Spotify and YouTube within the RSS feed, and therefore when you land on any Podcasting 2.0 app that supports the content links tag, guess what? You'll get a big, beautiful Spotify and YouTube logo, and then the person will just click there to watch video. And I went, well, you've got two chances of me putting that, fat chance and no chance, because I'm not driving traffic to them. And I went, and why are you driving traffic to them? Why are you? I said, as far as I can see, hosts are turkeys voting for Christmas right now, anyone who implements this, because all you're saying is, we're not going to do video, we're not going to support the alternative enclosure, we're just going to point links and just drive all our traffic, and we're still going to give them the RSS, and as you said, we're just watching them suck the data in, and there's no response, zero response from hosts at all to this.
Yeah, it's really interesting watching. It's like a large ocean liner. We're sailing towards an iceberg, and nobody seems to care. Everybody can see the iceberg, and they're going, "Brilliant! Look, there's an iceberg." And nothing else is going on.
Exactly.
We're not making any decision because we have no industry trade association. That is a global association about podcasting. There may be some about podcast ads, but there's none about podcasting to actually turn around and say, no, this is not what we want as an industry. I find it fascinating. John McDermott comes up with a lot of great stuff. He also links to us an awful lot from Calaroga Shark Media. He says a bunch of really good things in the postings that he is making. And again, he's very focused on making sure that it's not just handing everything over to YouTube and handing everything over to YouTube and Spotify. It's more than that. So it does make me quite weary about some of the industry where we can just sit back and just wait for us to be, speared by the iceberg and then start sinking, and then we'll go, oh, I'm really glad that they're sinking our entire industry. Frustrates me.
I think, we've talked about it. Maybe are the ones who are there, let's say there's 10 or 15 hosts, I don't know the number exactly. Are they going, oh, well, those 6 have gone, so we'll get a few more % from the ones that have left, and not saying that they're going to go to Spotify. Is it the last man standing strategy? Because I don't know if that's what they're going for.
Yes, I mean, it might be that. I had a good chat with Ben Richardson from RSS.com recently about this sort of thing, where he was worried that the age of collaborative growth in the industry had gone. And if you remember back when Acast were, sending everybody emails saying you should be switching to Acast's hosting, by the way, which they have very, very much ramped back in the last couple of weeks. That was rightly, seen as a bad thing because it wasn't the way that the industry had worked in the past. But now when you have a look at Spotify, a lot of their revenue generation tools are only available if you host on the Spotify for Creators platform. They are promoting that platform as often as they possibly can to you if they're there. Maybe that the collaborative world has finished. Chris Peterson from Download Media wrote a blog post this week, which I linked to yesterday. This strategy, he says, feels completely one-sided, talking about Spotify, focused on growing Spotify's premium product rather than growing the podcast industry. And I think that is the entire point. And the more that we see of that going on, the more concerned that I get about where this industry is going.
I don't know where it will stop, but at the moment, I can't see the Spotify juggernaut changing direction at any time. Moving on then, James, awards and events, what's been happening?
Yes, you can clearly see that YouTube are slightly worried about Spotify's big announcements about video, because YouTube, just days after that big announcement from Spotify, YouTube comes to me and says, we are running an online Q&A session on December the 12th. With Kai Chuck and Steve McClendon. Apparently they will be spilling the tea, whatever that's supposed to mean. They will be talking about platform updates and answering your burning questions. And Stephanie Chan will also join them, who is a strategic partner manager for YouTube podcasts. That's free if you want to take part in that. December the 12th, you'll find all of the details on the Pod News website. So funny that YouTube all of a sudden is talking to its creators as well. But, I would imagine that the podcasting accounts for about 2.5% of all YouTube plays. I can't see them caring too much about it, to be frank. But there we are. And if you're a journalist in Europe, then you should be at least considering taking part in the European Podcast Academy. It's in Milan, in Italy. It's in mid-March. It's a 5-day educational event dedicated to advancing the art of podcasting. They plan to have a bunch of really good speakers there. Now, the event is free, but if you are taking part as a journalist, and there are various things that you have to do in order to take part, they don't pay your accommodation and they don't pay your travel. But if you can get to Milan and you are chosen as one of the journalists who get to take part in this, then the European Podcast Academy might be for you. Slightly frustrating that they've called it the name of something which is an entirely different organization in the US, but still there we are. More details on that, of course, on the Pod News website.
The tech stuff on the Pod News Weekly Review.
Yes, it's the stuff you'll find every Monday in the Pod News newsletter. Here's where Sam talks technology.
So let's kick this off then. Alby appears to be shutting down its remaining Lightning wallets, pushing people towards the Alby hub. That was the announcement. Boomi, when I posted that onto Mastodon, came back pretty quickly. So Boomi is the CEO of Alby. He said legacy shared Alby wallets will be discontinued in January 2025 in favor of the brand new Alby hub. Users are getting migrated to the new system. No feed will break, and there will be some changes for the users. It's actually getting better, more scalable and future-proof. And to that I say no. No.
Yes, that's nonsense.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. I love Boomi dearly, but no, that is absolute.
10,500 sats for you to sit and run an Alby hub in the cloud, 10,500 sats per month. What's that? That's about $10, something like that.
I mean,
is it? I'm just making that up.
It's not expensive if you're a company. It's not expensive if you are a business, but it's absolutely ridiculous if you're an individual.
Yeah. So that doesn't work. Now, yes, you can run it on your own, on your own system and all of that kind of stuff. That's absolutely fine. But it's what a shame that essentially the company that was responsible in many ways for the whole streaming sats stuff in terms of podcasting appears to have changed their mind and closing pretty well all of that down and killing all of that stuff.
I mean, I wouldn't go that far. I had a conversation with a couple of people about using the Alby hub. So obviously I had a conversation with Alberto. I've had a conversation with Russell from Pod2. I've had a conversation with a few other people. Now, Russell at Pod2 is going to, still use the Alby hub, and it's a business, and so is RSS.com, and so is True Fans. We will all stay using the Alby hub. We'll still use the API. What I think is crazy is we were talking about, if it was my wife who is technical but doesn't understand a thing about sats and micropayments, and then she was going to come to a decision to start an Alby hub. Even I, James, find it as somebody who I think is fairly technical. I still don't understand why I've got multiple channels. I don't know why it's 250,000 sats and not 150,000. I just don't get it. I just follow the to-do list and I go, okay, it worked, but I have no idea why, let alone somebody who's what I would call normie, who has no understanding of the technology or even wants to use sats because they don't even have a why statement. I posted something this week, which was, in the Podcasting 2.0 community, we understand what and how. So what is a sat? How do we implement it with wallets? We get that. We've all been working on it for 2 years. I still think we don't have the why statement.
No, I agree. I mean, the why is a technical answer, which is that micropayments don't work with, in inverted commas, proper money. But that's not a why for the user. That's a why for us.
Exactly.
So I would agree with that. And I also think it's highly confusing because in one side we are saying, don't worry, you're not investing in the stock market. You're not investing in Bitcoin by turning some money into sats. But on the other side, their sats have gone up in value by 45% over the last month. That's how much Bitcoin has increased. So all of a sudden, actually, you've got that complication as well, in that sometimes people will see the sats in their wallet increase, or the value of their money increase. Sometimes they will see it decrease, and so they've got that to bear in mind as well. I mean, the whole thing. It's quite frustrating, isn't it? And you look at things like you look at some of the tools that are out there that are a bit more user friendly, but they don't accept. They don't use Lightning, and so therefore they can't be used with the current streaming sats plans and all of that. So it's a bit frustrating, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I had. Some of the tech bros giving me grief because we create virtual wallets as a way of overcoming this issue with Alby deprecating wallets. And they were like, well, why can't I put Lightning payments into your wallet? And why is it this and this and this? And I'm like, I don't want you to use my wallet to buy coffee and pizza. It's not a universal wallet. It has a function within my application. And yes, we might allow you to bring sats in shortly, but it's not my primary driver or goal as a business. My primary goal is for you to listen to a podcast, and if you choose to make a payment, that's great. And again, I had a conversation with a friend about why don't we just put a filter over the top of the sats and just show the local currency? Because I actually think, I hope I've been one of the advocates trying to push the micropayment rock up the hill. I've tried everything I can. We've got one-click integration with Apple Pay and Google Pay, which no one else seems to have yet. But we don't see people going, oh, yeah, I've topped my wallet up. that's great. I want to use SATs now. They just don't understand it. And again, I go back to the why statement. That's what I've had an epiphany of this week. I don't think we have a why should I spend money on a podcast anyway? And then why should I use SATs? They don't know that there's a technical challenge around, not being able to do splits or having clever programmatic money uses. They don't see that. They just see this funny currency, which they have no relation to. And it goes back to what Alberto was saying about parasocial relationships. We fundamentally can anchor our brains. 3 cents. Okay. If this in total is then 13 cents. Oh, okay. That's, that's like buying a Mars bar or something or whatever. We can anchor it to things in the real world that we are prepared to pay for. But when I say it's 6,000 sats, there is no anchoring. There is no, oh, is that a lot? Is that a little? I have no idea where that sits in the lexicon of payments. Yeah. I think that's the problem.
Anyway,
moving on, James.
Yes, moving on. CleanFeed has made a number of CleanFeed has made a number of improvements to the core audio quality of its remote audio tool. What does CleanFeed sound like? Well, it sounds like this, because this is what we're using. The benefit of using CleanFeed over and above things like Riverside and Squadcast are, apart from lower latency. So when Sam tells me to shut up, then I get that instantly in my ears rather than a second or so later. So not only that, but also what you hear is what you record. And that's something that is not the case if you're using Squadcast or the Riverside app or whatever it might be. You hear something, but the systems are recording something else. And quite often you end up with really crappy audio and you've no idea why that's the case. So the benefit of CleanFeed is I'm recording. I've got the record button on here, and what I hear is what I'm recording.
And it is true, because the interview we did this week with Alberto from RSS.com was done last week as well.
Yes, it was take number 2, wasn't it?
Yes, and post-recording, all I could hear was a clicking sound from Alberto's side. Now, Alberto and I were like, he's got a Shure microphone. It all sounded great while we were talking. There was no issue. I've had the same thing with Ellie Rubenstein when she did an interview, and it was pretty inaudible when we actually had it. We had to put it out. It's one of those things that CleanFeed does really well. Yeah.
So it's a very excellent thing, I should say, that CleanFeed give us CleanFeed Pro as a little gift, because they're lovely people. But frankly, the free version is just as good. Cleanfeed.net/podcasts is, I think, the one, or maybe /podcasting, one of the two. But worthwhile taking a peek at. Interestingly, I mean, they are so geeky at that company, and I know the two Marks well, but they are so geeky at that company that they say that they have made a number of improvements to the core audio quality. They haven't gone into what those improvements are because it's just too complicated to understand. But, why not? But they are super clever. What else is going on? OSHA has launched 2 new tools as part of their podcast search optimization stuff, which is worth a peek. Digital Music News says that Spotify playlists and podcasts are being abused by spammers to link to pirate websites. Well, that's something that we could have told them 3 years ago. And in fact, we did, because back in 2022, well, that's 2 years ago, Alberto Betella, friend of the show, friend of this show particularly, he wrote an article about how RSS.com deals with spam podcasts, because there are an awful lot of them. And an awful lot of spam podcasts on the Spotify for Creators platform as well. But clearly that's now hurting Spotify a fair amount. And I read a bunch of tedious stuff about the web VTT format. And basically saying if you're only going to use one podcast transcription format, then use VTT because it's better than, and apart from anything else, your web browser understands it and Apple Podcasts understands it. 2 ticks that you can't get with any other transcript format. So if you're only going to support that, if you're only going to support one, then support that. But you should, just for podcasting, make sure that you only use 65 characters a line, no more than that, because otherwise you're making life harder for podcast apps. But anyway, wrote a lot about that on Wednesday, which was a special extra version of the tech stuff in the Pod News newsletter. It had nothing to do with the fact that I forgot the sponsor for the tech stuff on Monday. Nothing to do with that. I just fancied on doing another one.
But you also, I mean, I do love these when you get into this. This is when you get into your geekiness, and I do love it because you also wrote these tricks to get live captions for every podcast you listen to. And again, I highly recommend looking that up, because it's really good stuff.
Yeah, live captions exist on every single system, with the possible exception of the iPhone. But certainly on Macs, you can get them on, on Windows machines, on Android, and they're really useful because they do also work on things like Clean Feed and Squadcast and those sorts of tools as well. So worthwhile turning on. What else is going on? The podcast location tag. The version 2 of it, the enhanced version, which can now tell you where the creator is, as well as what your podcast is about.
Finally.
Yay. So that is on the way. I have written a JavaScript tag generator, which is super easy. You just type in where you are, you press the button, and it fills out all of the tedious stuff for you. There's a full specification conversation going on at the moment. Hopefully that will be ratified soon, or agreed, or whatever the phrase is, and we can move forward with that. But if you are a podcast host, and I know that we have many who listen to us, then you can close that Google Maps API down. You can use the API from the OpenStreetMap and use the free JavaScript tag generator that we have, and it couldn't be any easier. So yeah, and if you are good at JavaScript and you can, add a few bells and whistles to that, then go ahead. It's on GitHub, and you're more than welcome for that.
If anyone wants to see the podcast location tag working, go into TrueFans and look up Pod News Daily and just go and look at the episodes, because you travelled around the world. So you were putting locations for Dubai and Heathrow and Stockholm and LA, and that all worked. And when you click on those links, it takes you to the map and you can see where James was. It's a bit like, where's Wally? Where's James? But yes, if you want, and you are building an app and you want to see how it looks and works as well from the front end, check out Pod News Daily on TrueFans and you'll see it all working.
Boostergram Corner on the Pod News Weekly Review.
Yes, it's our favourite time of the week. It's Boostergram Corner. And just as a reminder, we share all of the money that you send us very kindly for your support of this show between Sam and I. Nothing goes to the rest of the Pod News team, because why should they get any of this money? And you can press the fan mail button in the show notes for this very podcast and send us a text message. You can press the boost button in your favorite podcast app, and some people have done that. Here's one from Sai, 1,000 sats from Fountain. Thank you. It was interesting to hear all your thoughts about the additional exodus, see what he's done there, to social networks like Blue Sky and Threads. But it got me thinking if there's a way of correlating or bridging all of those accounts and habits, like TrueFans.social ActivityPub, between them all, especially with features like Blue Sky's AT protocol domain verification. Wow.
There is.
There's a thing. I have actually sat and written a piece of code which I haven't yet put live, but the idea is that it will take new posts that I put onto the Fediverse, and it will automatically pull those out onto Blue Sky, because there's an open API for the Blue Sky platform. So, so there is a way of doing that. And there's something called Bridgie, I think, which allows you to do that.
That's one of them. But also from a user perspective, there is a app called Croissant, which allows you to post from one Croissant app to multiple endpoints. So if you wanted to do Mastodon, Blue Sky and Threads all from the same one app post, then it will do that. So it's built in all of the bridges to those back ends, all those social media apps. So yeah, that's one app. I mean, I'm sure there's others coming. I mean, my point is, and I don't trust Threads as far as I could throw them. But basically, if they do proper two-way federation, that will actually be the road forward, so that you can use any one app, and then have, you can follow people on any other social media platform. That's the goal. That's the idea. But of course, Threads do it one way, which is like Spotify, suck data in, but give nothing out.
Anyway, moving on. What else have we had? We've had 20,000 sats from Martin from Podfriend. Hey, Martin, thank you so much for that.
Yeah, where have you been?
Yeah, where have you been? Thanks for what's always great news, James. He says, boosting the Pod News Daily. That's very kind of you, Martin. Thank you. Wonderful to hear from you. And what's this one from Silas on Linux? 10,000 sats from Fountain. What does he say, Sam?
You should be more clear when talking, guys. You should call True Fans the one open RSS player that supports every open RSS podcast namespace tag built on open HTML and open internet. Thank you, Uncle. No, thank you, Silas. It is a hard sell. We shout and shout, but I think I'm shouting into the void some days.
I think he's taking the piss about me saying open RSS. I think this is what's going on. Silas seems to comment on every message that I put on the Fediverse with some sarcastic comment, and I have a feeling this is one of those.
Oh, okay.
But
so
also
he's taking the Michael.
I think he's taking the Michael rather than saying that you're a brilliant person, Sam, and that you're doing an excellent job. But I think you're a brilliant person and you're doing an excellent job. So there you go.
Thank you very much. Well, if Silas, you want to do it yourself, mate, crack on. Get an app, do it yourself. Because he was one of the bros who was moaning at me about not having Lightning into the wallet. And I'm like, you know what? We'll get there. It's not the biggest thing in the world.
No, indeed.
So, yeah.
And also thank you to the Magnificent 11. I met one of them this week, Rachel Corbett. It was very good to meet Rachel again. I was down in Sydney, and she was there at something I'm just about to talk about in just a minute. But it was great to see Rachel there. Also, Dave Jackson, Mike at the Rogue Media Network, Matt Medeiros, Marshall Brown, Cameron Moll, Cy Jobling, David Marsell, Jim James, Rocky Thomas, and Neil Velio. It's very kind of you. Weekly.podnews.net if you would like to support us with your, or indeed your company's credit card. Go there. It can be as low as $3 a month, but most people pay more. So why don't you? What's happened for you this week, Sam?
Well, I am going to try and convince you that the Ray-Ban Meta sunglasses that I have, which I love, they've now enabled AI in the UK and Australia on those glasses. No longer do I need to use a VPN and pretend I'm in America. I can now go back to actually being in the UK. They've updated it with a few other bits and pieces. It's getting much, much smarter. Your AirPods, you have the option to have transparency mode where if someone talks, the volume drops down. They've added that. They've added much more to do with languages. It's now available in Europe. They're getting smarter, these glasses, and the hardware is the hardware. It's the software that's updating. And I think, James, I think it's time you got a pair. Yeah, no, none of that. Although I have actually just bought a new pair of glasses. I am that old now, Sam, sadly, that I need to wear multifocals, varifocals, whatever they're called. Yes, wow. I know. But I'm only wearing them in one eye because I'm weird like that. So I'm looking forward to getting hold of those in the next couple of weeks. God, no, I was going to say, my wife thinks I'm odd because I used to have glasses and now have perfect eyesight again. As I've got older. And now you wear glasses. And now I wear glasses. I went in to see if I needed a pair of glasses to go into those Ray-Bans. I was thinking, okay, if I need glasses, I might as well get them for those. And it turns out I don't need glasses at all, but they're good fun wearing them still. Well, there you go. The other thing I talked about earlier, I went to the Wondercraft announcement. They had a wonderful panel there. There's a guy called Daniel Hume there, Dr. Daniel Hume, who's the head of AI for WPP. He was a really interesting guy, very, very knowledgeable. So had a chat with him. That was very good. Saw Oscar and Dimitri, and they're going to be on the show hopefully pre-Christmas to talk about a few more announcements they've got coming up. And then just a bit of tidbit, because you know my village has everyone in it. I just thought you'd love this for your radio
here we go.
newsletter. Radio was invented in my village, James, and it's official. There you go. Marconi lived on the road next door to me, but one, and he basically did the first transmission from his home in Cookham. So radio as well was invented in my village. I thought you'd love that.
In Berkshire, yes. Just at the end of the road from Cookham Dean Cricket Club, 142 White Ladies Lane. And that is where Guillermo Marconi lived. And apparently he did experimental transmissions in 1897.
I'll see if I can get an interview with him as well. Oh, no, I can't.
Yeah, might as well. See if he's... well, I mean, you know, you might as well just knock on the door of 142 and see who's there and see if any of his equipment's still there.
They've got a blue plaque.
There is a blue plaque there, yes. Unveiled on the 3rd of September, 1996, I'll have you know.
Yeah, I've got a blue plaque on my door, by the way.
Do you?
Only Indian in the village.
Aren't you lucky?
Yeah. So what's happened for you, mate? What's happened?
I was down in Sydney on Monday for an Apple Podcasts event in Sydney in true Apple Podcasts style. I cannot tell you anything that happened there because they said this is just for us. But it was super good, actually. It was a really nice experience of just seeing a bunch of people who are involved in the Australian podcast industry. My favourite bit was there was one guy from a company called Audiocraft, which I've been, writing about for a while. Used to run a podcast a conference in this country, but no longer. And and he looked at my shirt because, of course, I was wearing the Pod News shirt, and he looked at my shirt and he said, "Wow, so is that actually a whole news service, but just about podcasting?" And I said, "Yes, it is." And the guy standing next to him said, "What? You're not subscribed to Pod News? You should fix that immediately." It was just hilarious. So that was really nice. So Rachel Corbett was there, of course, and plenty of other people. It was just a super nice, chilled out couple of hours, drinking Apple's coffee and eating Apple's canapes. And so that was a good thing.
So you can't tell us anything that went on there, but you just went to Apple. Nice.
Yeah, I just went to Apple. I mean, to be fair, they didn't say anything either.
Okay.
They did have a few nice numbers, which I'm trying to get acceptance for me to actually report on. But no, it was just an interesting thing. Quite a lot of it was just look, here's how transcripts work. If you haven't seen transcripts, this is what they look like. This is what we're doing. Blah blah blah. So there was nothing new there at all, but it was just a nice experience just to say hi to a bunch of people.
Dare I say embargo?
Is this? You sent me a very pained message on Wednesday.
Well, I was just worried for you, James.
Saying, James, the Amazon story, it seems to have disappeared from your website, and I don't understand why that is. But I got the email, okay. Yeah. So what happens is, if I was so excited about Amazon's news that I read the embargo. I mean, any news, but they are lovely people at Amazon's PR department. So I read the embargo time, and it said 6 a.m. Pacific time, 9 a.m. Eastern time, and I read that as 6 a.m. Eastern time, which it was not. And so I thought, brilliant, I can get that as my main story, blah, blah, blah. Sent it, bang. And then all of a sudden my phone went absolutely crazy as Amazon said, "What are you doing? What are you doing? We have an embargo and you've just driven through it 3 hours early." First time, Sam, in 7 years that I've screwed up an embargo. And of course I had to do it to one of the biggest companies in the world, didn't I? And they said, "Take it off the website now." And I said, "Well, okay, I've already taken it off the website. But the problem is I've sent it to 32,000 people's emails." And you could see the colour draining from their face at the other end of the telephone line. So they've all been very, very understanding. And I felt dreadful. But yes, that was definitely a bad thing. And the final thing, just on a very geeky technical note, I've been using a company called Uptime Robot for a long time, which sends you an email when your website falls over, which, if you remember, I had to deal with an awful lot a few months ago. Touch wood, everything is all good again now. But anyway, that was a super useful service. Anyway, they have, because of course all good things must come to an end, they have turned around and said, yes, Uptime Robot is now going to be free only for personal use, not for company use. So all of a sudden I had to cancel that. And then I thought, well, who else should I use? And then I had to look at my Umbrel. And my Umbrel has on it a piece of software called Uptime Cuma, which you just install on your Umbrel, and it sits there and does the automatic checks. And so that's what I've got working now, and it's fine, and I'm in control of it and everything else. And I've got it sending emails and sending Slack updates and all kinds of stuff. So very cool. So so if you are stuck in the same boat and you happen to have an Umbrel, all two of you, then take a look at Uptime Cuma, which you can also find and download and install on your own box wherever it happens to be. And that's a super useful thing if you have servers out there that you want to keep an eye on. And that's it for this week. All of our podcast stories this week were taken from the Pod News newsletter. You can subscribe to the newsletter at podnews.net. There are longer interviews in the Pod News Extra podcast. Really want to point you in that direction because you've only heard a third of both of the interviews today. You will hear all of them in the Pod News Extra podcast, but otherwise this podcast ends up being 4.5 million years long and nobody wants that.
Apart from Joe Rogan.
You'll find the Pod News Extra podcast wherever you find this podcast.
You can support this show by streaming sats. You can give us feedback using Buzzsprout fan mail in the link in our show notes, and you can send us a boostergram or become a power supporter like the Magnificent 11 at weekly.podnews.net.
Our music is from Studio Dragonfly. Our voiceover is Sheila D. We use Clean Feed for our audio, Hindenburg for our editing. I should say that because I've just got another free year from them. And we're hosted and sponsored by Buzzsprout. Start podcasting, keep podcasting.
Get updated every day. Subscribe to our newsletter at podnews.net. Tell your friends and grow the show.
And support us.
The Pod News Weekly Review will return next week. Keep listening.